Welcome to the Making the Difference in Student Success, the matter of affordability. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Grantmakers for Education in partnership with the Grantmakers for Education, Postsecondary Access, and Attainment Group. For those of you who are new to Grantmakers for Education, the vision of GFE is to strengthen philanthropy, to improve student outcomes, and increase and expand opportunities for all learners. For those of you who are joining the call today, please know that my name is Tina Gridiron, and I will be serving as your facilitator from the Grantmakers for Education. And we have two great presenters that are joining me today. Nicole McDonald, Strategy Officer with Lumina Foundation, and Sue Chui with the Great Lakes Higher Education Guarantee Corporation. Sue is a Senior Program Manager with Great Lakes, and Nicole, as I shared, is a Strategy Officer with Lumina Foundation, and they both have a deep and long-term commitment to philanthropy and as partners with the Postsecondary Access and Attainment Group and with the Grantmakers for Education. So we are excited to have their participation on the webinar today. This is designed to be an interactive webinar that will allow all of the participants to join in many different ways. Throughout the webinar, we will give you instructions on how to participate, and we hope that you will join in freely. There will be an opportunity to use a drawing tool that we will explain how to use the tool at the appropriate time. There will be an opportunity for you to raise your hand and to offer comments, raise your hand to agree with a particular moment during the webinar. And for those of you who want to try it out, as you can see on this slide, you should have a raised hand icon at the top of your screen that you can use. And if anyone wants to try out raising their hand, you'll get a sense of how that feature works. We will encourage you during different moments. I see Rebecca Smith. I see Sue Choi. Eric, thanks for raising your hand. Claire, it's great to see you also raising your hand. So this function will give us a chance to get a sense of who has a question, who has information that they'd like to share, and who might want to just draw our attention to something specific that is being discussed during the webinar. Desiree, we see you as well. So great to have you on the line. Another feature will be the chat box. As you can see underneath all the participants' names on your screen, there is a chat box with, in parentheses, everyone. We encourage you to ask questions in the chat box, to offer suggestions in the chat box. There will be moments where we ask you to share information about your foundation in the chat box section, and we just encourage you to use that function freely throughout the webinar. We will be saving the information provided in the chat box to help inform future work. So please make sure to check out the chat box and be active and engaged participants in the chat box. Also, as you can see, information's just been added to the chat box. If you prefer to ask questions privately or anonymously, you can send an email to me, tgridiron@edfunders.org, and I will be checking email regularly throughout the webinar so that we might also include other questions that show up. It's important that if at a time during the webinar you would like to share information, there will be points during the webinar where we will invite others on the call to share their information vocally. And in order to participate in those sections of the webinar, you will need to unmute your line. Currently, all lines are muted except for the presenters. And if you would like to unmute your line and participate vocally on the call, please press ** to unmute your line. Once you press ***, your line will be unmuted for the duration of the webinar. So if, once you've shared your comment, you would like to go back on mute, we encourage you to do so on your own handheld or LAN device. Please know that once you unmute yourself for the platform or within the platform, you will remain unmuted in the platform for the duration of the webinar. So to mute your line, you will need to use your handheld device or your LAN device, your personal device, to mute your line. We are excited about the opportunity to use many different features in today's webinar and to create an interactive experience during the webinar, and we will be excited to gather your feedback about the many different features. We also know that sometimes technical challenges arise within a webinar, and so to give you a bit of information about how to troubleshoot technical challenges that may come up, we encourage you to go to the link here through Adobe Connect that will also be available. That link will also be available in the chat box, so that once we pass through this slide, you will still be able to see the technical support link in order to gather answers to any questions that may come up. And if your problem is not resolved via the link, we encourage you to call our colleague at the Grantmakers for Education, Jesse Lee, for technical support. And his number will also be provided in the chat box as another resource for you during the webinar if technical challenges arise. We ask that you first check out the Adobe Connect technical support line as your first line of defense, and then connect with Jesse, because we have one person to respond to all questions, and he can only respond to them one at a time as they come in. Please know that at the end of our webinar today, there will be quite a bit of information shared about other great events and activities happening as part of the Grantmakers for Education Post-Secondary Access and Attainment team. And there will be other information about evaluation responses that we would like to receive from all participants on the call. So we encourage you to stay with us all the way to the end of the conversation so that we can make sure to give you all of the latest and greatest of activities and events happening related to the Grantmakers for Education Post-Secondary Access and Attainment group. For those of you who are new to our impact group structure, please know that Grantmakers for Education has developed a structure to bring different groups of funders together around specific content areas. And currently we have five impact groups up and running: our arts education, data, education policy, equity, and our post-secondary access and attainment group. These groups meet regularly in person and via conference call to strategize on new issues and events taking place related to those themes or those topic areas. And we encourage many other funders to take advantage of participating in these more clustered, intensified conversations around improving the opportunity for learners focused on arts education, data, education policy, equity, and post-secondary access and attainment. If you have questions about joining any of these groups, please feel free to reach out to me, tgridiron@edfunders.org, and we will be happy to connect you with the right team at the right time. With that, I'd like to turn the conversation over to my colleague Sue from the Great Lakes Corporation. We are excited about many pieces of information about the Post-Secondary Access and Attainment Group, and so I'd like to now turn the mic over to Sue. Sue?
Thank you, Tina. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here with us. I wanted to extend a warm welcome and a thanks on behalf of myself and my colleagues. We have a diverse steering committee for the Post-Secondary Access and Attainment group, and you'll see on the slide that our co-chairs are Rebecca and Mara from Kresge and Circle of Service Foundation. So in addition to them and myself and Nicole McDonald, we also have representatives of the Strata Education Network, Garin Family Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and ECMC Foundation. So the mission of the PSA2 group is to deepen GFU member learning and facilitate collaboration to inspire and to take collective action at scale, and as well as to achieve an impact that improves post-secondary access and attainment for students. So we're very excited that you've joined us today, and we're eager to begin our conversation around the topic of affordability. So let's start by framing the conversation around an observation of what the college students of today are going through. So who they are and what are the various needs that they face. So that'll be the first thing on our agenda. After that, having taken stock of the students that we need to be serving well, we'll move on to an interactive portion of the presentation. And this is where we'll ask you to help us have a lively discussion amongst peers. I think I just wanted to give make mention of the fact that this will be somewhat new to us. I think I've heard from GFE that facilitating this kind of webinar is new to them. So please have patience with the tech and have patience with the way that this webinar flows. And we really hope that you will be able to share your stories with us and that we can use that as a way to move forward. So that's the last thing on the agenda, touching base on how we might continue the conversation to learn and to work together in the future.
This is Nicole McDonald. We're really excited about the opportunity to engage with you in this particular format. And so I just wanted to underscore as we move into more of the meat of the agenda, that this is really an opportunity for engagement among funders across the country and in multiple contexts, whether national, regional, state, local contexts. And so we're really excited about this opportunity for engagement. And I just wanted to take a few moments to really underscore the importance of you being engaged and sharing about the work that you're doing as we move throughout the agenda and the activities this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are. I wanted to just underscore that because this is your time. And we really respect and appreciate that you made this time today. We want this to be a meaningful experience for you. As we've already said, we're really committed as part of the Postsecondary Access and Attainment Impact Group that we really want to deepen opportunities for learning together and inspiring action together and in a way that will make a difference in our work and also in improving the access and attainment for post-secondary students. So this is your time. We want you to take advantage of it, and we're so excited to be here with you this afternoon.
Thanks, Nicole. So before we get into any more of the substantive material, let's take a minute to test out the technology. So I just activated the drawing tool, which you should see pop up on the left-hand side of your screen. It looks like what's represented on this slide here. So if you find it and select the marker, you should be able to then select the color for your marker. So please take a moment to test that out and see if you can get that to work. Underneath the part where you can select the color for your marker is also a way to select the size. And we found that the default size is quite small, so unless you're sitting very close to the screen, we might not be able to see you. So this is me. I just did a smiley face. And once you've gotten the hang of this, please raise your hand so we can have a quick glance at the roster and see when most of us are ready to move on. I also want to point out that there is a back button. So this is an undo. Oops, I think I've just tried to cross that out myself. So I need to use the undo button to undo what I just did. And that's right here. I'm pointing with red. And that will take away the mark that you've left. So please use that if you, yes, exactly, that's where it is. Please use that if you've made a mark too quickly and want to change your answer, but I think these are the main features that we'll be using today. All right, and then we see there's some collective troubleshooting going on in the chat box. So if you're having trouble getting this to work, please ask for help or as others are doing. And once you have the hang of it, please raise your hand so we can see when most of us are ready to move on. All right, it looks like that's most of us. So this won't be the last time we try this out. In fact, the next opportunity is coming up right now. So if you don't mind, please take your hand down or lower your raised hand, and we'll move on to the next slide. So here we go. The drawing tool should still be on the left-hand side of your screen, but we'd like you to use the marker and show us how you think about this statement. I am a funder in the college affordability space. So please draw a line on the spectrogram representing your feelings about this statement. And can I ask you to also raise your hand again when you're done? Although I can see there are several lines on here, so this is good. Oh, and it looks like we are spanning the complete spectrum from fairly strong disagree to fairly strong agree. Fascinating.
We're really excited to see the range of responses across the spectrum in terms of being a funder in the affordability space. We've tried to frame this conversation in such a way that will allow us to learn a little bit about the dimensions related to affordability and low-income student support, as well as the opportunity to talk about different types of work that might be leveraged to help support affordability and to make a difference in that regard for post-secondary attainment. And so it'll be interesting to see if and how, based on the discussion that we have this afternoon, some of the thinking about where exactly you are on the spectrum may shift. And I'm thinking in particular around the ideas of maybe some of the funders who are on the line, who are represented on the line, who may disagree. So we look forward to this particular discussion. In terms of framing the conversation this afternoon, we thought it might be helpful by starting with a little context about the diversity of today's students and their experiences. Roughly 40% of today's undergraduates are over 25, and only 13% live in on-campus housing. 40% of today's students attend school part-time, and less than 5 years ago, just under 1 million undergraduates were veterans, active military personnel, and/or dependents of veterans. More than 1/3 of today's college students have low income. However, many low-income students who would be eligible to receive Pell Grants do not receive or even apply for the Pell Grant. And that's where that number of approximately 1/3 of students being low income is largely derived from. As we continue the discussion related to the diversity and experiences of low-income students, we'll push a little bit more on some other facts that will help us understand a little bit more about how the dimensions of who the students are that are represented as low income are slightly different than we may imagine by just looking at Pell eligibility. Specifically, an unprecedented number of students are struggling to manage limited financial resources. The reality of the challenges they face is all too clear. 47% of today's students are financially independent, and they don't rely on parent or family support. 42% of the students that are financially independent are actually living in poverty. 48% of today's students work while enrolled in school, with 40% of community college students and 20% of bachelor's degree-seeking students working more than 20 hours per week. 4.8 million college students were parents as of 2012, and 43% of student parents were single mothers. 89% of those single mothers were low income. Many of today's students are dealing with these limited financial resources to support their post-secondary attainment at a time when the costs of post-secondary education are on the rise. Over the past 30 years, the total cost of college has increased by 162% at four-year colleges, 168% at four-year private non-for-profit colleges, and by almost 70% at community colleges. During the same 30 or so year period, the median household income grew by only 12%, and for families in the bottom 40%, the average household income only increased by 4%. Traditional financial aid options such as grants, loans, and scholarships exist to help bridge the gap between costs and student resources. However, because both the total cost of attendance and the pool of eligible students continues to increase, these forms of support are simply not enough. The average Pell Grant today covers only 33% of the cost of attending a public four-year college or university, as compared with roughly 73% back in 1980. And the Pell Grant barely covers 60% of the cost of attending community college. Considering these challenges, it's not really a surprise that there are considerable attainment gaps by income. Significant equity gaps in attainment by income. Low-income students continue to trail their higher-income peers in post-secondary attainment. For example, only 11% of students living below the poverty level graduate within 6 years. 38% of students with additional work, financial, or family obligations leave school in their first year. More than 50% of student parents leave school with no degree. And more than 3/4 of the individuals from high-income families have a bachelor's degree by age 24, whereas comparatively, only 9% of individuals from the lowest income quartile have them. In fact, as we look at graduation rates by family income, research indicates that students with below average test scores from the richest families complete at 30%, whereas students with above average test scores from the poorest families only complete at a rate of 26%. The disparities are glaring. These gaps can be attributed to several factors. While not always the case, many low-income students are among the first in their families to attend college and, not surprisingly, lack knowledge of how to navigate and cope with some of the challenges presented by post-secondary contexts. In many instances, this adds to their struggles in selecting appropriate courses, identifying, accessing financial supports, and seeking out other forms of assistance that could make the difference in terms of their ability to complete. In some cases, but not all, there's a need for developmental education, which has significant implications for students' fees and the time required to complete post-secondary. And significant infrastructural issues exist as well. Simply put, most of today's colleges are simply not aligned to serve and support today's students. So as we consider the range of challenges associated with the context for affordability and low-income student support, we're excited to engage around these ideas that not only create the challenges for low-income students, but also that can help advantage and strengthen the context and close equity gaps for their attainment.
Sorry about that. I was on mute. Thank you, Nicole. I'm sure many of us are eager to get our hands on those slides, and especially for the fact that you've included a bibliography, which is very good practice, I think, for our community to be talking about these topics with a lot of data in our back pocket. So transitioning to this slide, you'll see that I've reactivated the drawing tool. So this is where we'd like to get a little bit more interactive in our presentation and ask the community that's with us today, what are some of the things that we are funding? So keeping in mind some of the things that Nicole had just talked about in regards to the context and the student bodies that we are working with, where do some of your projects land? So just to model what I am looking for, I will use a marker, and my color is this brick red. I will mark for Great Lakes that we are doing a lot of work in the emergency aid space, as well as some projects that focus on the curriculum and pedagogy. Specifically, in the curriculum and pedagogy space, we are supporting a project on around open educational resources, OER, and that is a project where we have a network of colleges working through what it takes to implement OER degree pathways. So not just individual courses, but pathways so that colleges can offer these to their students in a way that really takes into account what are the best materials that exist, what are the more forward-looking pedagogical approaches, and as well as, and certainly not least, the consideration of how much textbooks cost. And these things all factor into the affordability of college for students. Emergency aid is probably even a more straightforward example and more obvious how that factors into the ability of a student to afford college because these programs help them to account for and to address needs that just come up that are not planned. As a definition, emergency aid is really intended to cover things that students cannot plan for. And those are two areas that Great Lakes is doing quite a bit of work in. And I see that we've great. We have many different colors selected, and folks are also using the chat box to type in what's missing. That's exactly right. Thank you for that. And I'll share that an exercise like this is mirrored a little bit from on something that the PSA2 steering committee members had done during an outreach meeting, or sorry, a meeting that we had amongst ourselves when we were discussing different topics that we were each working on. We found ourselves covering many of these different spaces, but found ourselves also realizing that these different types of projects did address a topic of affordability. So thanks, Rebecca, about the question regarding public discourse and what that means. I put that in here, and again, these tiles are not intended to represent the full spectrum of work that exists in this space or that work that you all are doing. These are just some things that we thought might be applicable, but we were hoping that folks would put more in. So for public discourse, this is pointing to the way that we talk about the cost of college and the student loan crisis, and how oftentimes a lot of these news stories that do get quite a bit of attention are talking about affordability of college in a more narrow sense than we would like it to be. So, for example, if someone is talking about the high cost of grad school or of medical school, yes, we don't want to dispute that or take anything away from that, but I think speaking for myself as someone that works at an organization like Great Lakes, we want to bring more attention to the fact that even post-secondary institutions, 2- and 4-year schools, that their education is at times out of reach, even if they are more affordable than grad school, that they are out of reach for a lot of students. Thank you to our colleague at TG, whether that's Jenny or Kristen. Thank you for indicating that research is also missing. I'm sure that if research were on there in the tile, many folks from Lumina would be choosing that as well. It seems like there are, yes, Nicole?
In the chat box, FAFSA completion and faculty staff administrator training and parent education were also highlighted. I just wanted to note those.
Oh, great, thank you. Thanks, Eric, for putting that in. So I'm thinking, what if we took some time to discuss some of these topics and ask for folks on the line to share an example about the work that you're doing in this space. So before we do that, if I could ask everyone to lower your raised hand if you have them raised right now. So what I'll do is pick a tile where it looks like there's a lot of us working, and that could be employer or industry engagement. And I'll ask folks who had indicated work in that space to raise their hand if you're willing to share with us, to the group, something about a project or a strategy in that space that you're working on. And I won't call on you if your hand is not raised, but I've worked with enough teachers to be comfortable with that awkward silence to an extent. So Christy, thank you for offering to share. As a reminder, please hit ** on your phone to unmute yourself and begin speaking. If you are talking now, Christy, you are on mute. While we wait for Christy to sort that out, would anyone else care to share something about the work that they're doing in employer or industry engagement, or perhaps in one of the boxes where fewer people had indicated their work, which is in curriculum and pedagogy? Would someone be willing to talk about your work in that space? Please raise your hand to indicate interest. All right, since we don't have any takers on this question, Nicole, I wonder if you might have an example to share from Lumina's work.
So absolutely. I think actually that one of the marks in the curriculum and pedagogy box was a mark that I made. If that sort of fat yellow line is mine. So I'd be happy to share a little bit about that. One of the things that we are very passionate about at Lumina is the idea of making sure that students who start post-secondary education really have an opportunity to complete. Ours is a completion goal with a strong sense of urgency. And we are keenly aware that there are more than 36 million folks who are considered adults with some college but no credential, or some post-secondary learning or training that have no credential. And also, as a part of our plan, our fairly new strategic plan for 2017-2020, we're focused on adults who also have no recognized post-secondary education. So as we're looking at the idea of curriculum and pedagogy, we think that it's important to position post-secondary attainment including post-secondary education training, whether that's work-based training, traditional post-secondary learning, competency-based education, et cetera. We think that that is the way to help elevate the economic condition of low-income individuals or individuals with low income, and we're really trying to leverage that as a strategy against poverty, an anti-poverty strategy. One of the approaches that we're taking related to curriculum and pedagogy is an initiative called Degrees When Due. Degrees When Due is actually a combination of two efforts that were focused on associate degree attainment. Project Win-Win, that many of you probably heard of several years ago, led by the Institute for Higher Ed Policy, and also Credit When It's Due, which was actually a reverse transfer effort that Lumina sort of led and organized, but that was organized among a funders collaborative. Degrees When Due brings both of those associate degree attainment efforts together to try to help put a dent, ideally leveraging more than 500,000 credentials toward associate degree attainment in that space. We are really concerned about the idea that there are so many students who either completed the requirements that they needed to earn a credential but didn't get it, for reasons that they didn't have the resources to pay the graduation fee or other things to complete, and also that there are near completers, people that are one course, two courses away from, in many instances, completing a credential. We feel like it's really important for students to have the credential that they have invested time in earning, and so one of the mechanisms to help keep people on a path toward a credential is Degrees When Due.
Thanks, Nicole. So let's keep the markings that we have on this page in mind as we move to the next slide, which is exactly the same thing, but a clean, fresh slate. And this is where I'd like us to think about going one level deeper. Can we share with each other how we are making grants in these various areas, particularly in ways where different topics are being combined or addressed in the same project? So as an example, I've worked on projects where it's linking employer engagement and curriculum and pedagogical reform. These are projects where you take into account what the employer needs are and have them tell faculty and college leadership the types of skills and competencies that they require and desire out of the students that are showing up to their door, and in that way work together to foster a very close relationship. That's just an example, and I see lots of folks are putting marks on the page. And one other thing that I'd like everyone to start thinking about is what are ways that you might be working in one or more of these topic areas with other funders? So where have you had successful co-funding partnerships with others to address topics like this? I'll, again, give a very quick shout out and say that I've worked on curriculum and pedagogy work through the OER grant with the Gates Foundation. So that's where Great Lakes and Gates are each taking a portion of the cost of the project, which is carried out through the Achieving the Dream Network. And by co-funding, we're able to cover the costs for schools to be involved, as well as to fund external evaluation of the effort. So here, I was hoping, Christy, you might try again with your phone line to speak about any of the things that I just went over. I trust that there's no shortage of material at the Gates Foundation on this topic.
Yeah, sure. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, you can. Oh, great. Okay, great. So one of the things that I would mention that we're considering right now is the relationship between developmental education reform and the systems and supports for advising redesign and how those are related. And if you were to think about them in an institution context and their integrations perhaps, or the many ways that those experiences are connected from the student perspective, then what kinds of synergies and opportunities would we have for making maybe more cohesive or coherent investments in each of those areas? So that's one of the things that we're currently thinking about. I think a number of people are aware as well that in the developmental education area, there is an initiative of the PSA2 where a number of funders have come together in order to think about how we might further scale what we've learned in DevEd reform to a number of other institutions and states. And some of my colleagues that are here today could speak even more deeply about that work, but that's another example. And I don't know if you'd like me to keep going, but that's at least a couple of things that we're involved in and thinking about that I've represented here.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. Would anyone else be game for trying this out? Do you have a creative or a relatively novel co-funding experience, or even if it's not creative or novel, if it just works, it works. Does anyone have anything to share about either ways that you are working with others and leveraging other funding, or ways that you are linking up these different topic areas? If you have an interest, please raise your hand. Otherwise, I'll ask Mara Botman if she might be able to say a few sentences about the work that she's doing to bring about emergency aid programs at the city and the regional level. I think that'll be a really great framing of the work that I think sometimes is done at an institutional level or perhaps nationally. But Mara, could you say a little bit more?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Woohoo! So one of the things that we've been interested in the Chicago region is how do we raise emergency aid funding not for a single organization or a single university, but how do we do it in a regional approach similar to how the housing and homelessness funders really kind of through some federal money have raised centralized dollars for housing and homelessness emergency aid, and how do we do that as a group? So instead of having each organization have to have its own emergency aid fund, how do we do it in a centralized way to hopefully both touch kind of big organizations, small organizations, as well as to create the systems and practices? One of our lessons learned had been that some of the people who usually provide advising are not necessarily experts in navigating the social service sector. So really, how do we partner with the social service sector and their expertise to ensure that students are getting everything to which they're eligible for?
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. So I hate to move on because it seems like we have a lot to talk about just looking at the different lines drawn on this page. But moving on, we'd like to get a sense of where the community is funding. Nicole?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was on mute. So we had the opportunity to exchange some ideas about what we're funding, how we're funding, and we thought it would be helpful to take this opportunity, and you guys have already picked this up, about where we're funding. Some of us are funding nationally, some of us are working in regions or in particular communities in much the way that Mara just described, and so we'd like to get a sense of where work related to affordability and financial stability are occurring. So if you would take the opportunity to make a mark, there is actually a dot, and so some of you have started to use that. Show us where it is you're working across the country. We think that that will help us really figure out opportunities maybe to even leverage learning and connecting and relationship building together.
Great. We're starting to see some of the coasts fill in. And there's also a few marks in the box indicating that you're funding some of these strategies nationally. I wonder if that's research work that you might be consider national funding. That certainly is the case for Great Lakes and probably for Illumina as well, right, Nicole?
Yes, actually. There are several research efforts that I think have national implications around issues impacting low-income students. A lot of that research is generated by our federal policy and finance strategy in D.C. They're working with a number of groups, and then also we have tried to leverage especially work like FAFSA completion and some other work across the 75 community partnerships for attainment. So that looks a lot like probably national funding, even though it wasn't taking place in every community in every state. We engaged that work in about 75 communities across the country. And then there are other efforts that we're working on that represent collaborations that would have an impact at scale.
For the other folks who are who left a mark in the funded nationally space, just type in the chat box very quickly what that work entails.
It looks like maybe college promise campaign work. There's some more things coming.
While we wait for that, I think what I'm observing is that there's quite a bit of overlap in California and Texas, which is not a surprise, as well as in Washington. Sorry to all folks in Washington for conflating this city with the state.
There's also a little bit of
Tennessee,
in
Florida. Read your mind, Nicole.
It looks like there's some work to fund federal and state policy work, as well as national infrastructure work, and especially around 10 focus states. ECMC is doing some college promise work. Gates is doing work in 10 states, as well as some national, federal, and state policy work. There are a couple of folks that are typing. It looks like federal and state policy research and institutional practice work, and then also focus states and communities, and specifically related to, interestingly enough, out of Lumina's federal policy work, we developed an affordability benchmark focused specifically on leveraging the idea of college costs. And so that work was leveraged at the federal level. That would represent one of the funding nationally dots in the box, and that work is now being leveraged at a state level. So it represents sort of scale from one level to another in work that we've already sort of launched nationally but are going deeper in other states. So thank you, David, for highlighting that. It looks like maybe we need to move forward to, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. So thanks everyone for doing that. So let me take away the drawing tool now. And now that we've spent quite a bit of time looking at the things that we are currently doing or things that we might have done in the past, let's talk a little bit about where we might want to go. This is, in terms of your own foundation giving, or perhaps this is an area that you want to explore and work with others on, or if this is part of a learning agenda, if not a specific grant right away. But we have a poll set up for you to check off up to 3 of these priority areas. And if something that's on your mind is not represented in this list, please type it into the chat box and we'll take account of that. But we're hoping to just sort of, again, take the temperature of the folks in the room to see what is front and center for you. So some of these items are copied over from the slide with the tiles before. So, let us know if shifting the public discourse and media coverage is still something that that you want to continue working on. And as I go through this list, we will pull up the poll, which you should be seeing right now. Supportive state policy and federal policy is also something you can vote for. Addressing the pedagogy and curriculum, or looking at pathway style reforms. We also listed on here an emphasis on enhancing the student support services. So this refers to the different services that exist on campus for students. It could capture the work done by a single stop center, or tutoring, various forms of tutoring that exist on campuses, things along those lines. We also made room here for folks to indicate if you're concerned about whether students can work at the same time as they go to school, and as well as their just general living costs. So aside from the cost of attending college, where they're paying for college fees, tuition, and books, these are the costs that accumulate in students' lives that have nothing to do with school, but really have a huge impact on school. And I think we can all see how some of the, oh, I forgot to vote myself. How our votes are tallying up. We have a lot of interest in enhancing student support services. A few folks that are interested in FAFSA completion. And I think do we have a sense of what the other costs are? Research and data. Thanks, Nicole. And that Desiree also added in the need to prevent the proliferation of various courses on campuses that aren't very aligned with existing pathways. So that certainly leads to students getting confused about which classes they need to be in, but also, I'm sure, affects the administration of that institution and how they're able to apply resources smartly. Desiree, I hope that I didn't butcher that description, but I think from what I know of your work that that's the general sense. So now that, sorry to cut off anyone that's typing into the box, but we are running out of time quickly, so I just wanted to move on to the next slide and administer the last poll, which is how should we stay connected, because this will inform what we do going forward. So thanks everyone for taking the time out of your day to participate and to listen in on this webinar. Please let us know to what degree you want to stay engaged with us, whether you want to just stay informed of the things that our group is doing and learning, or if you have something on the table that you want to bring up for consideration for co-funding. That's the last mark that you can make. as well as you are in the space where you have some budget and you're looking for things to co-fund, or you want to piggyback on someone else's project to learn about that topic in the meantime, that's also an option. Or if you just want to talk shop about any of the things that we discussed today, that's also an option. So Nicole, I think we are at time, but what are the things that you have left to say? And if you're talking, you're on mute.
Yes, that was the second time today I did that. Thank you. Since we were talking about opportunities to stay connected, I want to mention just a few coming up. So the annual GFE conference is coming up October 16th through 18th in Washington, D.C. There are an array of sessions that are going to be very interesting to engage in related to post-secondary access and attainment, and there's going to be a reception with John King, former U.S. Secretary of Education. Related to this topic, we think there are going to be lots of opportunities to continue to engage around the ideas that have been established here. So there is going to be a pre-conference workshop focused around this topic of affordability and student financial stability. At the GFE conference, it's actually going to be the day before on October 15th from 3 to 6 p.m. So please register for that conference. For more information about either of these, please take a look at edfunders.org. And we know that we're at time, so we just want to take this opportunity to thank you for participating with us this afternoon as a part of this discussion. We're happy to make sure that you get this presentation as part of GFE Connect. So you'll have access to the markings and the information and the research and references that were shared here this afternoon. We really appreciate your time and your engagement and your patience with us as we try out technology for new opportunities to engage. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much to the GFE team with technical support and the facilitator. And thanks so much to my colleague Sue Chue and to all of you. Thank you.
On behalf of Grantmakers for Education, we thank you for participating in today's webinar. We encourage all of our participants on the line to please fill out the survey. We would like to hear your thoughts and feedback about this structure and this experience. Today's webinar, entitled Making the Difference in Student Success, the Matter of Affordability, was brought to you by the Grantmakers for Education in partnership with the Grantmakers for Education Post-Secondary Access and Attainment Group. Thank you all for joining us, and special thanks to our presenters, Sue and Nicole, longtime Grantmakers for Education participants and leaders in the philanthropic sector.